following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Nice music. We are back. Throneberry Fields Forever. I've got the man himself, Jeff Kallman. How are you, sir?
So far, so good, Ralph.
Well, it's early. We'll keep it good, though. How about that?
We'll do our best.
Good. Let's talk a little ball. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, this week that Major League Baseball said it was going to partner with the Independent Atlantic League to try some of the rule changes they're proposing. And I've got a list of those changes right here in front of me. Change idea 1, the home plate umpire will be assisted in calling balls and strikes by a TrackMan radar tracking system. And I can't really say that I'm that much against the idea because God only knows the umpires are not just imperfect, but for how many years have you heard talk during a game you might be watching about this umpire has this strike zone and that umpire has that other strike zone, and nobody seems to be enforcing the prescribed strike zone. It's always about the umpire's individual strike zone. This guy will call the low strike. This guy will call the high strike. This guy will call the inside strike. This guy will call the outside strike. The uniformity in the strike zone has been taken too far away from the game.
And not only that, wasn't a strike, and isn't it by rule book definition, armpit to knee?
I believe that's the rule book definition: armpits to the knees and covering the width of home plate.
Right. Now,
that's the rule book.
That would be a high strike at this point in baseball history.
It would depend on the height of the hitter. You've got some pretty tall swingers in there. They're going to have by the rule book, they'll have a higher strike than another guy will. Aaron Judge is going to have a higher strike zone than Cody Bellinger.
Or Eddie Goodell.
That wasn't a strike zone. That was a postage stamp.
Number 1/8 if you're scoring at home.
Which come to think of it, they used to talk about pitchers like Greg Maddux as being able to hit a postage stamp on the belt buckle with their ability to locate. But the umpire strike
and to move that strike zone out and further away little by little. So umpires are human. I can understand that. If we had Al Clark on here, he would be shitting a rusty nail if there were talk about that. How could they
we can't
assist?
have any damage to his system.
Would the umpire make the call and then a buzzer goes off, or would the call?
I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, but I know that for a few years they wondered about using robots instead of plate umpires. And let's go back even further. Summer of 1999, do you remember the mass umpire resignation that upended the old umpires union? One of the issues...
I didn't follow it specifically, but go ahead.
I did. I think just about everybody in baseball did, especially when it looked like the old umpires union essentially wanted to be a law unto itself. What triggered the whole thing looks to have been baseball's government decided they wanted more oversight over the umpires, and a lot of that involved the strike zone. Baseball redefined the rule book zone basically as a result of the old umpires union refusal to call the high strike. Their old leader, Richie Phillips, said that baseball had no right to do that without the umpires union approval. And at the time, Sandy Alderson was working in Major League Baseball's offices. I forget exactly what his job title was, but he responded to that when Richie Phillips, the old umpires union leader, said he equated umpires with federal judges. Alderson said this: "Federal judges can be impeached. I got worried when I found out players were more concerned with who was umpiring the next day than they were about who was pitching." So the strike zone issue has been there for several decades.
Right.
And I'm in favor of anything that helps to enforce the proper strike zone and level out the battle between the hitter and the pitcher. And it's not going to hurt either one, I think. The hitter will have a better idea.
It used to be leagues as well. One league had the chest protector on the outside, one on the inside, and
that's
the
a superficial
excuse was
distinction. Yeah, that's really that's a superficial distinction compared to the strike zone issues that go across both leagues.
No, but they made that as an excuse that one league was a high league strike zone because they had that chest protector and couldn't get down or something like that. But traditionally, one league called the higher strike than the others. Now the umpires are all one Major League Baseball. There's no American League umpire, National League umpire. That's a thing in the past.
And they're all over the place with how they call strikes.
Right, and that itself.
Two umpires who call the same zone.
Yeah, and sometimes they want to go home late in the game. You know, they're human. It's 85 degrees. They're sweating for 3 or 4 hours, and subconsciously they want to get the game over with. I see that on the bases at times.
And you read all
Not
kinds
so
of
much
stories
anymore
about
that they have
personalizing
instant replay.
too. You also used to read all kinds of stories about umpires personalizing the strike zones. I remember reading one story in Ball 4 that Jim Bouton told that when Steve Whitaker was a young Yankee outfielder, he disputed a call, and according to Bouton, the word got back to the Yankee dugout that pitching to Whitaker, the strikes didn't have to be that good. So they suggested Whitaker apologize. And things like that happened in the past. That there's no getting around that. But anything that will make more uniform the strike zone, and it's going to do the hitter and the pitcher a big favor.
Yeah, but by the same token, along with what you're talking about, they extended the distance between the mound and the plate. Am I correct?
They're trying that in the Atlantic League, and I'm rather against that. I mean, everybody is concerned about the lack of offense. Now, what they don't understand, I think, is they're really misinterpreting the issue with the overshifts. That's one of the things that people are alarmed about when it came to a supposed lack of ball action at the plate. The shifts really are not as shifty as people think. I looked it up to write about it in December, and I came up with this from Fangraphs. Last year, teams put the overshifts on only 17% of the time, and 5 teams who did it the most averaged 11 shifts a game and gave up 3 1/3 hits, and the batting average against them on those shifts was .277. That's not too shabby. And the teams who shifted the least, 5 shifts a game, and it was a .300 batting average against them. But really, the shifts, the way to solve the problem with the shifts is to start realigning the thinking among hitters and their coaches. You see, you're being shifted on. Look at that big space on the other side of the field. Hit that way, for God's sake.
Yeah, but how much power do you give up, and how does that transcend to when that player goes to the pay window?
A power hitter is going to get his home runs and his power numbers. I looked something up today that I think you might find interesting, and so would everybody else listening. I looked up a player, one particular player, his lifetime totals. He's a left-handed hitter. He has 69 home runs lifetime pulling. He has 94 home runs lifetime hitting straightaway, and 20 going the other way. But notice the straightaway figure for this guy. 94 of his home runs, and that's a little more than half the home runs he's hit in his career. His pull-hitting batting average, and you expect this of a guy who pulls. You expect a guy who's hitting on the same side that he bats on is going to have a nice average. This guy has a 384 pulling. Up the middle, he has a 354. Going the other way, which he hasn't done as often as the other two, he's still hitting 405. And he has 20 home runs going the other way. A power hitter is not going to lose his power regardless of which way he hits. And this guy hitting straightaway has a little more power than when he pulls.
Yeah.
Now I'll tell you.
I know Willie hit to right center a lot. And
let me tell you who the player is that I was just talking about. Bryce Harper, left-handed hitter.
Oh, interesting.
And until
what do you think of the signing of that contract, both from Bryce Harper's standpoint and from the Phillies standpoint?
Well, from the look of it, that contract was already paid for his first year's salary because the sales of souvenir items tied to him directly shot the lights out the first weekend, never mind the first week that he was a Philly. His jersey, replica T-shirts of his jersey went through the ceiling and beyond. If those sales haven't paid his first year's salary yet, they're on the threshold of it.
Okay.
So already he's paying for him. It's paying for itself. And about the signing itself, after the deal was actually done, he had an introductory press conference a week ago yesterday, and it turns out that the owner was thinking as follows. I'm quoting Scott Boras, Bryce Harper's agent, who was at the conference, and this is how he quoted Phillies owner John Middleton. Scott, I want to tell you something. I'm not interested in talking about marketing dollars, ticket sales, billboards, concessions. There's only one reason I'm talking to you, and that's because I believe this guy can help us win. I've made enough money in my life. I don't need to make more. My franchise value has risen dramatically over the last 25 years. I don't need it to rise more. If it does, fine. I'm here to win. I think your guy can help me win. End quote.
That's nice to hear from an owner. It's not just bucks. It's just he wants to win.
It's definitely an exception. Also, everything I've read tells me that Middleton played to one particular side of Bryce Harper that doesn't often get talked about. I don't know if you know this, but Bryce Harper is a non-drinking, non-smoking Mormon. He got a strong work ethic from his father, who was an iron worker right here in Vegas, as a matter of fact.
So he's got a number of wives to support, and it's not just one.
No, it's not. He's not that kind of Mormon.
But no, that's
Harper's
okay. It's okay if he was. God bless him if you could have more than one wife and do what you have to do.
That'll teach me to keep my big mouth shut.
No,
but anyway, Bryce
idea.
Harper's third home, besides what he makes with his wife and the one he makes at the ballpark, is the gym. He's a gym rat.
Right.
But when John Middleton, the Phillies owner, went to Las Vegas for a final meeting with Harper and his wife before the deal was done, the only one he took was his own wife. He didn't take anybody else from the team.
Or anybody else's wife. I thought you were going to say the only one he took was my own wife, his own wife.
No, he
took
is he a Mormon? He didn't take Middleton. I don't know.
Okay.
And it's not relevant.
Not that man, but they respect each other and they respect the family values. I'm sure.
Well, that was the point. That was the point of meeting just the two couples together. The Middletons
right.
married almost 41 years, and the Harpers were interested in how they made it work in the middle of their career arcs. That was something that Harper.
Just that they asked the question says a lot about them as a couple and as individuals.
And as baseball people. And to keep in mind, it was Harper who wanted a place to stay put for the rest of his career. His contract doesn't have any kind of opt-out clause in it. That was Harper's idea. Essentially, when Harper started negotiating seriously with the Phillies, he told Scott Boras to keep his mouth shut. And something that I understand impressed Middleton spectacularly was this. Middleton also met Manny Machado early on in the free agency season, and Machado to Middleton made a big mistake. Machado let his agent do the talking for him. When he met Harper basically taped Boris's mouth shut. Harper did his own talk. He talked about the Phillies' 2008 World Series in detail, and he'd seen that when he was in high school. He talked in detail about how pitchers approach him, how he approaches them, and how other pitchers and players approach each other. Basically, Machado.
Is he from Philadelphia? Was he a Philly fan growing up?
Harper, no. You're thinking of Mike Trout. Harper is native of Las Vegas.
Whom he kind of wants to come with him to Philadelphia, I understand.
Well, he has dropped a couple of hints, and he has almost come right out and say it, and the Angels got a little ticked off at that and wanted Major League Baseball to investigate that. And I say, what's the big deal? Other sports, you hear players talk about other players saying, boy, I wish those guys were with us. Nothing wrong with that at all. I still remember reading once.
We say there's nothing wrong with it as fans, but there are tampering rules in baseball.
How does that apply to a couple of players? They're not managers. They're not coaches. They're not general managers. They're not the owners.
Yeah, but it seemed to have pissed Philadelphia off or Anaheim off.
Well, let them steam. The Angels have work to do themselves. They have to decide once and for all, are they going to build a team that the best player in baseball can be proud of and get to work on making him an Angel for life, or are they going to let him walk?
Well, for the first time, right after that happened,
both.
For the first time, right after that happened, I read where they were thinking of extending.
They're thinking about it. Thinking about it,
and I think that might be it.
And they've got 2 years
to decide.
Trout's in the last 2 years of his current deal.
Boy, I thought this was his last, but I guess not. Next year as well.
No, he has this year in 2020. Mike Trout hits the free agency market after the 2020 season.
Okay.
And if he keeps playing at the level he's been playing at, if you thought the Harper-Machado market was going to be tricksy, just wait till Mike Trout hits the open market.
Well, what did Joe DiMaggio say when Joe DiMaggio was interviewed long after retirement? They asked him, "What in today's market? What would you say to your owner?"
He said he'd own the team.
Yeah, he said, "Hello, partner. Now I'm going to be your partner."
Once upon a time, and people who think that the pre-free agency era players only played for a love of the game, back in one of his earlier seasons, DiMaggio had a contract holdout, and at one point, I think it was Ed Barrow who was the general manager at the time, and he told DiMaggio something along the line of, well, Lou Gehrig is only making such and such, and DiMaggio's reply was, Mr. Barrow, Mr. Gehrig is badly underpaid.
Yes. And there was a book written by a former commissioner, Giamatti or someone, saying they'd have played the game for nothing. And it was written about the players of the 40s and the 50s, the Robin Roberts and what have you. That was so silly because they were actively trying to get a union. They were.
Robin Roberts was one of the key men who brought Marvin Miller to become the executive director of the Players Union. Roberts was once the National League player representative to the commissioner's office. He gave that up when he left the National League, but I think it was in 1965 he still had some juice with the player representatives, including Bob Friend of the Pirates. And at the time, Friend had the gig that Roberts used to have. He was the league player representative to the commissioner. Roberts asked Friend if he could talk to a meeting of the player reps. Friend agreed, rounded them all up, and Roberts pitched to them they needed to have an executive director for that union. At the time, the issue was pension. And finally, they agreed to a committee of 4 players to find an executive director. The committee was Roberts, Friend, Jim Bunning of the Phillies, and Harvey Keene, who was playing for the Cubs at the time, I believe. And they were the committee who ultimately found Marvin Miller.
Well, they did a hell of a job. There's a man who
they were involved in pension issues and things like that for at least a decade and a half before they got Marvin Miller. So, yeah, these players, I mean, they loved playing the game. That's true. But baseball was a business as well, and they knew that unlike other businesses, franchise or otherwise, the product was the players. You weren't buying your way into a ball game to see the manager, the coaches, the umpires, the general managers, the owners, and even all the souvenirs and drinks you bought at the ballpark. That was secondary to the reason you were there in the first place. You were there to see the players. You were there to watch Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax, Juan Marichal, Richie Ashburn, Harmon Killebrew. You were there to watch those guys. They were the reason you went to a game in the first place. You weren't going to. You didn't walk through the turnstile and say, okay, when do we get to see George Steinbrenner? All right, I'll make one exception. In the 1980s, Yankee fans were probably going to Yankee Stadium as much to bitch about George Steinbrenner as to watch the Yankees. I'll give you that.
Or to watch Billy Martin in the Bronx Zoo.
Well, we don't have very many colorful managers anymore. We don't have colorful managers really anymore. We don't have a Casey Stengel, an Earl Weaver, a Lou Piniella, a Tony La Russa, a Leo DeRocher, or a Billy Martin.
It's a general manager's game, and it's an analytical game.
It's not that much of a general manager's game, but the managers now, they don't have those kind of personalities. Not the way Stengel, and Stengel, if you think real deep about him, could be called the inadvertent grandfather of the sabermetric manager, because he thought about things like percentages, on-base percentage, matchups, long before anybody put a name to it.
Right.
He thought that way, and so did Earl Weaver.
And so did a very underrated manager in baseball, and that is Al Lopez of the Chicago White Sox.
Al Lopez thought that way. Davy Johnson taught himself to write computer programs where he could run assorted matchups and use those to manage the early mid to late 80s Mets.
Whoa.
And Tony La Russa began doing something similar when he moved from the White Sox to the A's.
Well, I followed those 80s Mets very closely, and that was a deep team, and he really moved those guys around. He had Mitchell going to play shortstop every now and again, Danny Heap coming in, Strawberry, Wilson.
I still remember the classic move that he made. It was in an extra inning game against the Reds. He had Jesse Orozco on the mound and didn't want to get rid of him, but he had Darryl Strawberry out of the game, and he wanted to play pitching matchups without losing a pitcher, so he put Roger McDowell in right field and then rotated them back and forth between the mound and right field until the Mets won the game.
I remember that, as a matter of fact. Davey Johnson, very underrated manager, had his demons. I think he would have, without them, would have been more successful. But,
it's not that he had his demons. It's that Johnson. Now, some would tell you that this was a mistake. Some would tell you this is a virtue. Johnson believed, I'm managing adults, treat them like adults. As long as they go out there and play the game right, I'm not going to worry about them off the field. Now, maybe he should have a little bit more.
Oh, you
but
think?
With a different team, it works. Now, he won with that team.
Wait a second.
But look at the price.
He had two guys in particular that were first ballot Hall of Famers to be. Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry. He had them under his guidance, and on some way he could have done better. Davey.
I don't think he could have with Darryl Strawberry. Darryl Strawberry had plenty of demons of his own that I don't
he
know.
He couldn't have done. I know, and it was a generation of partiers or abusers, coke users, this, that, and the other thing.
It wasn't just that. Nobody could really reach Strawberry for a very long time. Now, with Dwight Gooden, I don't care what anyone else says. I have read enough about this young man and how he was handled to be able to say safely that whatever anybody else thinks, the real reason Dwight Gooden went from off the charts to just a good pitcher was how he was mishandled in spring training 1986. This kid knocked baseball on its ear from the mound. Sandy Koufax himself said, I trade my past for his future. Then in spring training, Mel Stottlemyre, the pitching coach, and assorted front office people started putting doubt into his head. They started telling him he needed more. They started telling him what he had wasn't good enough. They started telling him to stop thinking about striking the world out when he was doing just that. And they had him throwing pitches that he couldn't get comfortable with, and he was a mess. He came out of spring training a mess. Gary Carter and Ed Hearn, the backup catcher, both have spoken about that. Carter himself especially said they had him throwing things that were not natural to him, and pitching had always been natural to him, and they knocked him off his balance. That's the real key to what happened to Dwight Gooden. And that may have also led to the shoulder issues that he had for the rest of his career. But
and
when
the
you
substance
take a guy,
abuse problems is what I'm thinking of.
Secondary.
And managing is more than just managing fundamentals, pitching style, this or that. Managing is communicating.
When you take a guy who just knocked baseball onto its ear, was the best pitcher in the business, and you suddenly tell him he's not good enough, when he's got the evidence to show you otherwise, and they start tinkering with him, I wonder if one didn't help exacerbate the other.
Right.
But that's the real story of what happened to Dwight Gooden. The substance abuse was a very sad corollary, but what happened to him as a pitcher is what I'm talking about. The Mets ruined him.
Okay. Well,
they had the best pitcher in baseball, and they told him he wasn't good enough.
Well, did they say it like you're not good enough? I mean,
they told him that he couldn't get by with just that stair climbing fastball and that voluptuous curveball. Well, that's a funny thing because I've known a lot of pitchers, including Hall of Famers, who got by with two pitches.
Yeah. Well,
but you don't have to use the words "you're not good enough" to send the message that you don't have enough or that you're incomplete. Gooden was not stupid.
Yeah.
But
as a Met fan, I mourn the fact that they only had one world championship. They broke it up too quickly, and those two just never materialized to the Hall of Fame ball players that they should. Whatever the reason, it just didn't work out.
The strange thing of it is that Dwight Gooden ended up not missing it by much when all was said and done. If you look at his complete record for all 16 years that he pitched, he didn't miss the Hall of Fame by much. On Bill James' measurement of the Hall of Fame standards, he only came up short by 10.
Okay,
and he still rates,
I don't know
as of today, he still rates as the number
20 as opposed to 100. What do you mean 10?
The average Hall of Famer makes 50% of these Hall of Fame standards. Gooden made 40.
Okay.
Even all the years that he pitched, tried to pitch and work around the shoulder issues and everything else, he still didn't come up that far away. He right now ranks as the number 97 starting pitcher of all time.
Yeah, given his natural talent
he's in
and ability,
he's in the top 100.
And what he did in his first few years, that's disgraceful.
This was he was a kid, and by his own admission, he admits that no teenager is ready for the kind of attention he got. But when he walked onto the mound in 1984, 1985, he knew what he was doing.
Right.
When he wound up and threw, he didn't look like a kid. He looked like a well-seasoned veteran out there. He knew exactly what he was doing, what he wanted to do with it. The only flaw he had was that he wasn't that good at holding base runners, but how many pitchers really are? That's not exactly a vice. You're talking about a young guy who knew what he was doing and to whom pitching came naturally, plus the intelligence he brought to what he did. And then in spring '86, they tell him he doesn't have enough.
Yeah.
Stop trying to strike the world out when he was doing it naturally.
Jeff, that was a tragedy, but we had a real tragedy in the Met family this past week. A pitcher who did it right, who fulfilled his potential, his expectations, who did it with class, dignity, the most important person in the Met franchise, beside Casey Stengel and Gil Hodges perhaps, was Tom Seaver. And Tom was diagnosed with dementia. He's retired from public life and won't be attending the ceremonies when they honor the 50th year anniversary of the Met team. That's a tragedy, and I just wanted to.
It is a tragedy, but on the flip side, God bless.
How was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? What was the flip side of that?
The flip side is that Tom Seaver has lived well as a pitcher.
I know he's still, by relative standards, by my standards, a young man. Oh, okay. Yes, he has lived well, absolutely. But I just wanted to note my opinion that it's very sad when something like this happens.
It's very sad that he has to deal with that. It's even sadder when you think of how many former players are dealing with such things. Bud Harrelson is dealing with Alzheimer's disease.
Absolutely, yes. And this has been a tragedy.
Jim Bouton has a type of dementia, and Fritz Peterson, the former Yankee pitcher, deals with Alzheimer's.
And many that we don't know about. How about that?
Exactly.
So let's be grateful that for every day and every lucid day that we have. And
Tom Seaver had class above and beyond baseball. I've got something here that I want to share with you. When Seaver was traded to the Reds, the Saturday Night Massacre, among those who lamented it was A. Bartlett Giamatti, who was at the time still the president of Yale University. He hadn't left Yale for the presidency of the National League. He wouldn't do that for another decade. But he wrote a piece called Tom Seaver's Farewell. And he had once gotten to meet Seaver, spent an evening with Seaver and his wife at the home of Eric Siegel, the author of Love Story. This is what Giamatti remembered. Seaver had dignitas, all the more for never thinking for a moment that he had it at all, a dignity that manifested itself in an air of utter self-possession without any self-regard. It was a quality born of a radical equilibrium. Seaver could never be off balance because he knew what he was doing and why it was valuable. With consummate effortlessness, his was a talent that summed up baseball tradition. His was the respect that embodied baseball's craving for law. His was the personality, intensely competitive, basically decent, with the artisan's dignity that amidst the brave but feckless Mets in a boom time of leisure soured by division and drugs seemed to recall a cluster of virtues no longer valued. And toward the end of that essay, he made note of a banner that was hung up in Shea Stadium the day after the trade. The banner said, "I was a believer, but now we've lost Seaver." To Giamatti, that meant lost faith, I quote, lost faith in the Mets' ability to understand a simple, crucial fact, that among all the men who play baseball, there is very occasionally a man of such qualities of heart and mind and body that he transcends even the great and glorious game, and that such a man is to be cherished, not sold.
That is beautifully written and very poignant. My God, that was great. First, as you're reading it, I'm thinking of Monty Irvin. There is a guy, that kind of class, a Stan Musial kind of class, that you always want in your organization. And Trout is that way. We were talking about him earlier.
Mike Trout is that way. And before
right.
You mentioned Monty Irvin, you mentioned Stan Musial. Sandy Koufax has it.
Yes.
Bob Gibson has had it. Henry Aaron has it.
For sure.
You hope to get
and Clemente had it, and Minnie Minoso had it. Yeah, and Minoso had it as well. And here's someone who had it that never got into the Hall of Fame, and I think died of a broken heart. He died soon after his last chance at it, and that was Buck O'Neill. And there's a guy that kind of class that that you would want your Hall of Famer to have if you're a kid and you don't know any better, and you're gonna pick people to idolize: the Ernie Banks, the Harmon Killebrews. Got to choose your idols carefully. And
today like you mentioned, today we have Mike Trout. There's Mookie Betts with the Red Sox.
Right.
There are several players.
Oh, absolutely. There's Adam Jones, I can think of, who happens to still be a free agent, and I think the Giants ought to sign, and even the Mets ought to sign him for a little insurance, given the fact that they have 3 injuries a week. Every
better
week,
the Mets than the Giants, if
whether they need them or not.
Because the Giants are already an old team.
Well,
the Mets
yeah, but
are not an old team. If they can find a way to plug Adam Jones in, it'd be a smarter signing for the Mets.
Yes, but
the Giants
are really reeling right now.
Are spitting in the wind right now. They need to think about a complete remake, remodel.
Yes, true.
Be not surprised if.
But they're not. They are not the kind of
organization
that just says we're rebuilding. They are.
Well, you can rebuild on the fly. You don't have to tank. But let's say if Madison Bumgarner looks like anything like his old self as the season gets underway, don't be shocked if he's a non-waiver trade deadline candidate.
Well, that's a very good point.
I would see him going in a trade for a couple of prospects and a couple of major league ready young guys. That'd be the deal to make.
Right, but that always sounds so horribly ominous to a season ticket holder. How about that?
Well, the Giants have been ominous to season ticket holders and otherwise for the last couple of years.
Yeah, but they're coming off a period where they won 3 championships very close together, and the
last of those were 5 years ago.
That's true. That's why the fans are.
The Giants are in for a reality check this season, and so are the Giants.
Okay, well, so are the Dodgers, by the way. So I don't feel too bad.
I think the Dodgers are in better shape, and we were talking about players with class. Clayton Kershaw, right there.
And they all.
That's
true. I cannot.
But I think the Dodgers are in better shape than the Giants are for the season.
They lost a good part of their outfield recently with Pugh and Kemp. And say what you want about Kemp. Kemp can give you months where he carries a team to this day.
Not the way he
made Cincinnati a much better ball club.
See, him and Puig are going to be great for Cincinnati. Kemp will be good for them, whatever he does on the field, because they need some veteran leadership to go along with that young club they've got. Puig has a chance to rebuild himself there, and so far everything I'm seeing out of it is that he's sliding in very nicely. Their key is going to be up and down their roster. Everyone's going to be pitching in. I don't think you're going to see a single star on the Reds, but the whole team is going to make the Reds an interesting watch this year.
So let's count on that. Hey, Jeff, terrific third effort now. It's becoming effortless. Your efforts are becoming effortless, seemingly effortless. You put a lot
Let's just make a point of saying that I'm not going to even think about doing this in my sleep.
Oh, okay. Well, no question about that. And it's really fun chatting with you, and we're going to do it on a regular basis. So the show is Throneberry Fields Forever. The host is Jeff Kallman. The station is the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And I'm fortunate enough to get to play Fenneman to your Groucho. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Ralph.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Tell your friends. Pass it on. Adios, everybody.
Hello.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.